terrifying because I really believed he would eventually kill me. I didn't think I didn't think I would survive. I thought he would definitely kill me. I'm Farrah Lovell. I live in San Antonio, Texas. I'm 45 years old. I am a surgical assistant. I've been working in surgery for about 20 years. I have 6 kids. I have 4 daughters and 2 sons. I am not married. I have been in a relationship with the same person for several years now. My kids range from 26 to 6, so it's always exciting and something interesting going on. My mother and father were a unique couple, I guess. He was very abusive to my mother, so my earliest memories of my father was him beating my mother. Yeah, that day it was Mother's Day, and we were having a get together. It was nice, and then something set my father off, and they started fighting, and he just was beating her so horribly, just dragging her by her hair up and down the stairs, and then back down the stairs and up and down the stairs. And I remember I was just like holding onto his leg, and I was like, please stop, just begging him to stop. And he just kept beating her, and finally he stopped beating her, and it was like time to go get my sister, and we left, and she was like, we're gonna leave, we're not gonna come back, and we're not going to stand for the abuse anymore. So when we came back, she started getting things together, and I remember feeling so terrified that he was just going to kill her as soon as he saw us trying to leave. And I heard his motorcycle pull up. I went and hid because I was like, this is going to be bad. And he came in and he just grabbed her and he held her. He like kissed her, and she was like crying, and he was crying, and he told her, like, I'll never hit you again. And he never did. He died, in July 4th, or July 5th, technically, and he never hit her again. I can understand my mother's point of view now, just from all the things I've been through in my life. And I always said I would never be like my mother. But essentially, I think when you have abuse in your background, it's hard not to follow that same pattern, unfortunately. And I fell into several abusive patterns because of that exposure as a young child. Marty and I met through acquaintance at school. I was 15. It seemed like a good idea at the time, I guess. And we were married. Like 6 weeks later, Marty starts beating me. He is physically abusive, sexually abusive to me. He killed several of my animals. He's just a very cruel person. He didn't take life into consideration. He didn't take people's feelings into consideration. It was terrifying because I really believed he would eventually kill me. I didn't think I would survive. I thought he would definitely kill me. Finally, I started to just feel like, you know what, like I don't care, like I gotta get out of this situation, he's gonna kill me. And there was this day that he started choking me, and he's choking me, and I could feel that my body was losing consciousness. I was like, okay, well this is it, he's gonna kill me. And I woke up and he was shaking me on top, he thought he had killed me. And at that moment, I just like lunged at him. I started choking him. I was like choking him back. I just remember feeling like I just wanted to like make him stop hurting me. I needed to get away from him. Looking back, I've grown tremendously as a person just because I know that I survived. I overcame so many different obstacles, so many different things that I, at the time, felt like possibly I was not going to get through, but I did. And I think that's why I always wanted to share my story and write my story, is just to let other people know that no matter what the situation that you're in, no matter what people are telling you, or how hopeless you might feel, like there is hope, and there is a silver lining at the end. You just have to keep pushing forward, and you will persevere. Like, it will be okay. Things will work out, and we'll live another day. I was just looking for the questions. I don't see any questions yet. So, hi, I am Farrah Lovell, and you just watched my video, a short clip for Real Women, Real Stories. And I was going to give you a little bit of information about my life growing up in an abusive relationship. I grew up in Galveston, Texas. My mother and father met in Galveston, and they started their relationship. Shortly after that, they moved to Pennsylvania, where my father is originally from, and my mother became pregnant with my brother. I have an older brother who's 5 years older than me, Marshall. And so they lived in Pennsylvania, had a baby. My mother said that while she was pregnant with my brother was the first time that my father hit her. And that cycle continued until a few months before he died. So I think that abusive patterns continue. I believe that they are passed down. My sister is handicapped. I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me, Tiffany. She was born in Pennsylvania as well. She, at the age of 17 months old, started having seizures, and they were unable to get the seizures to stop. So she is disabled. She lives in Austin State Home. She's been there for several years. So my mom and dad were moving from Pennsylvania, and my sister started having seizures, and that was a new dynamic added into their relationship. It caused a lot of stress on their relationship. They moved back to Texas, back to Galveston. That's where I was born in 1977. And my parents worked, my mom worked predominantly in bars as a bartender or waitress. My father was a welder, fabricator, builder. He was very talented, very good at what he did. My mother and father started to become very abusive with each other because my father expected my mother to do as he said in every aspect. She couldn't cook using anything with preservatives. She had to can our food. He was very strict, and she was a very good mother when he was living. She taught me how to cook by counting. She was always there. We spent days together while my brother and sister were at school. So the relationship dynamic was completely different when my mother and father were both together and he was alive. Once he passed away, I feel like my mother definitely went a completely different direction. But my mom and dad started having issues very early on. There wasn't really like a trigger moment, I don't believe. I don't think there is. My father's father was abusive to my grandmother. So I believe that the cycle just continued with me. But anyway, back to the story. I was born in 1977, and my mom and dad lived in Galveston, and we had a hard life. It wasn't a simple life. My father had a difficult time keeping steady work. My mother was always working in bars, and so their relationship was always very tense. And he would just have moments where he would take her to the beach and hold a gun to her head and tell her he was going to kill her, or he would just get set off by something and he would start beating her. And we were witness to it. We saw the abuse day in and day out. It wasn't until July 4th, when he was killed in a motorcycle accident, that my mother just went off the deep end. She quit trying so hard. She just decided, I think she wanted to go and be herself and explore her own life because she had been trapped in this marriage for 13 years. So essentially, my brother, my sister, and I were left to fend for ourselves because my mother was busy finding herself. You know, I was 5, Shane was 10, and Tiffany was 8. So there was times we had no food. There was times, most of the time, we were not supervised, and it was constant need of some kind of parental guidance. I was taking care of my sister. I had to take her everywhere I went, and it was very hard. So I feel like domestic violence affects your children, it affects your life decision, it affects everything. Hold on a second. I cannot see the questions. I can't see the questions. I normally see. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's not letting me see the questions. Let me see if I can minimize this somehow. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty. I'm not. Okay. I can see it now. In your story, I have a friend of mine, she's 17, and being physically abused by her mother mostly, and her stepfather. I also told her to go to the police. Yes, if she's being physically abused by her mother and stepfather, I would definitely say she needs to go to the police. Wait.com. Hi, how different is physical violence from mental and emotional violence? I think mental violence can be worse than emotional violence, personally. Mental violence sticks with you, it doesn't really go away. Where physical violence, the wounds essentially heal most of the time, unless it's a drastic situation. But mental sticks with you forever. It's the tapes that play over in your head that people have said to you, the things that they've done to you, the things that they tell you you are, which you aren't. I think definitely mental abuse is worse than physical abuse at times. What is a woman? I guess it's what you make her, right? Greetings from India, real woman here. Nothing fake except the old time when I smile. The odd time when I smile. Hello. No profanity, please. You. Being a unique experience that cannot be faked. Thanks, Shannon. So, do you have any other questions about my story or my life or anything particular? Um, awake.com. So, my uh, my mom essentially was ran over by a drunk driver a year later, oddly enough, and she had rebuilt my dad's motorcycle that he was killed on, and she decided that she was, gonna rebuild it and ride it, and she did. And she was driving to work to pick up her paycheck, and a drunk driver had left one bar. They'd been out all morning and crossed the street at an angle and ran her over. And she broke every bone in her body. So she was in the hospital for a year. And my brother, sister, and I were sent to live with an aunt in Dallas who was extremely strict and had 3 other children at the time. So it was definitely a difficult life experience. Losing a father, almost losing my mother, and then being transplanted to go live with an aunt who was very strict and had other children. So that dynamic of our life was, I felt like, very trying because we had been through so much at that point, and it was such a strict family household, and there were so many kids going on that it was really, really hard part of my life. My mom finally got out of the hospital after about a year, and she moved us to Arizona not long after that. We lived in Phoenix for a while, right next to a a motorcycle shop, RV place, because we lived in our motorhome next. So it was it was kind of interesting. It was nice. Flagstaff was beautiful. My mom was actually working a real job at that time. Um, so things were going pretty good then. And we moved to Phoenix a few months later, and the situation started to change at that point. My mom was doing different types of jobs. I think she was a call girl at one point, and then she started selling drugs and started doing, check schemes and things of that nature. So it was a really crazy time that we went through. My brother and sister and I essentially just raised ourselves because my mom was absent. She would come in for a few days and then she would leave a few days. Sometimes she would bring food, sometimes not. Most of the time, it was going to school to get, breakfast and lunch. That's what we looked forward to. There was times that we would go to the grocery store and we would have my sister make a huge scene. We would tell her, act bad, Tuffy, act very bad. And she would just start making a scene so we could steal food because we were hungry. So I think domestic violence coupled with neglect, because maybe the other parent can't cope with the situation that they went through, and so they deal with it in a different way. I think that was probably a mom situation. So I don't know. Do you guys have any questions that you're interested in hearing about, or anything that interests you about my story of what you know so far? So when we were in Arizona, like I said, we had a lot of different things happen during that time. My mom was selling a lot of drugs, having a lot of people in and out of our house. Essentially, my cousin Norman had moved to Arizona. He was my aunt's son, and he was like my favorite cousin. He was absolutely amazing. And one day he came over and he went into my brother's bedroom and overdosed on drugs. And I saw him, and I was the last person who talked to him. I was 10 years old. And I think that affected me more in my life than anything, was being exposed to drug use and then losing somebody very dear to me from an overdose, and seeing it happen before my eyes at a very young age. So I think that was a turning point in my life. I know it was a turning point for my mother and my aunt and my family. Essentially, it was a life-changing moment for everybody. So I have a difficult time with suicide or overdosing or anything like that, because it hits home with me of losing someone instantly. Like, you have zero control over it. So I don't know if anybody else has had situations like that they've had to deal with, but for me it was one of the most difficult things I've ever dealt with in my life, was losing someone that way in front of me. So, but things became more difficult in our household after that. Our electricity was, turned off. We had no water. My mom had no money because everybody, didn't want anything to do with her because she was considered to be hot, I guess. Her drug dealer came over and knocked on the door and wanted to talk to my mother. And my brother had answered the door, and he came in and tied my mother up to a chair and was interrogating her while we sat on the couch watching. So it was just complete insanity growing up. There was never a normal childhood. We weren't playing board games and roasting marshmallows. In fact, I didn't have a s'more, like roast a marshmallow outside, make s'mores until I think I was in my 30s. So I think you know, I guess I'm still having issues. I'm not seeing the questions. I'm really sorry. I just keep talking, trying to keep it going. So for me, it was, losing Norman, losing my father, losing my mother, losing Norman, and then essentially being displaced because since my mother's situation was so critical, then essentially it made our lives even more difficult because she couldn't take care of us. So she sent me to live with my aunt. She sent my sister to live with my grandmother in Galveston, and she let my brother stay in Arizona with her, and he essentially was left to just run the streets. He told me that he was doing speed, that he was eating food out of trash cans, and he was like 15. So no parental control. As for me, I felt a complete loss because even though I had wished and dreamed all of these years that my life situation would be different, it wasn't. And my dream childhood, it was to be in a family that was normal and happy, and we did things together. And I went to live with my aunt in San Antonio, and she had this beautiful home and beautiful everything. Everything was perfect. Why wouldn't I be happy? But I wasn't happy. I didn't have my mother. I didn't have my father. I didn't have my brother. I didn't have my sister. I had no normalcy of life. And I was put into this life that I didn't recognize, even though I longed for it. I didn't recognize it. I didn't feel comfortable. And I think that was the first time I realized that I felt alone. Even though I had people around me, I felt very alone. And I remember getting depressed, wanting to hang out with the wrong crowd of kids. So it's very difficult, to have a child go through so many different things. And, here you are like 11, 12 years old now, and you have all these emotions and you really don't know where to put them. So at that point, I started drinking alcohol and doing drugs and hanging out with people that really didn't have my best interest in mind. I didn't have my best interest in mind either at that time. But my mom had gone to jail and gotten out. And at this point, I was supposed to be starting 7th grade, I believe, and I ended up back in Arizona with her. And I just ran crazy. I did whatever I wanted. I hung out with friends. I did whatever. We graffitied my room and my bedroom. We moved from place to place. We never really had one set place. There was times that we would just live in hotel rooms and move from hotel to hotel. And none of them were in her name. So, they didn't care if they trashed it or they didn't care about it. It wasn't an issue because it had no real morals, really. So my mom ends up getting arrested. She's going to go to prison. She's looking at real time, like long time, like 110 years, 170 years, something crazy. And I'm essentially living in an apartment in Arizona by myself. And ironically, I get a Social Security check because my father had died. And I would pay the rent with the Social Security check. And somebody found out that I was living there, a minor, alone. So they called juvenile detention on me, and I was essentially removed from there. But there was a lot of really bad stuff that happened to me while I was living there. And I essentially got put in juvenile hall and then sent back to Texas to live with my aunt. And the situation just became worse for her because I was so rebellious and she couldn't contain me. She couldn't reason with me. I didn't want to hear anything. I knew everything. So I ended up finishing school because I had dropped out of school while I was in Arizona. Got back into school, ended up finishing 7th, 8th grade, 9th grade. And then I had met Marty around that interim time, and I dropped out of school and essentially just started working. So at 15, I dropped out of school and started working different jobs, doing different things. And Marty essentially had gotten in trouble, so he was on probation. He ended up violating his probation, but escaping it somehow. And he and I ended up in Colorado. So we ended up in Colorado. It's crazy. And the situation, goes from bad to worse. So there's so many details and aspects of my life and my situation and decisions that I made because of the abuse that I saw as a child and the abuse I endured as a child from so many different aspects. I mean, I could tell stories for days and days. If I could ever get the comments up, I could answer questions. I'm so sorry that I cannot answer your questions. So I guess that's essentially how I got to the opening video. Was when we were in Colorado together. We ended up staying in a tent and living. One second. I ended up living in Colorado with him in the mountains, and we just moved our campsite every couple of weeks. You had to move every 2 weeks, and you were fine as long as you moved every 2 weeks. So that's what we did for a while. And then essentially one night he got really angry with me because we'd gone to like this college party and there was this cute girl there, and he really wanted to like get with her. And he wanted me to persuade her to get with us. And I really didn't want to do that. I had no desire to do that. And so he started beating me, like up and down the street, like dragging me down the street. And this guy jumped in and was like, "Hey, you need to stop." And Marty pulled a gun on him. And there was a few cops just, standing across the street diagonally. And they essentially chased him down, caught him, and arrested him. But that was like the end of Colorado. So I ended up getting shipped back to Texas from Colorado. And Marty, essentially, after he was released from jail, he ended up going back to Texas. But that was essentially where, at this point, I was 16, almost 17, and Marty came up with the great idea that, it's legal to be a stripper at the age of 17 in Texas. So he convinced me to drop out of school again and become a stripper at the age of 17. So for my 17th birthday, that was what I did. I went and took my clothes off because he wanted me to. And I had lost all of my self-identity. At that point, I was a tool for him. I worked for him. I provided everything for him. I had to be obedient for him. Otherwise, he was going to teach me a lesson and let me know that he was in control. And he had told me multiple times that he would kill me, that he would kill my family. He would constantly humiliate me just because I guess it made him feel good. So I guess since I'm not having the ability to answer questions, I guess we can try to re-stream and see if it will work next time. I'm really sorry. I was hoping to answer more questions and see if there was specific things you would like to hear about or know about. If there is something that you want to know about specifically, you can try to put it in the comments, and maybe I can go back and look at it so I could answer those questions on a restream. So, or if there's anything that I talked about that you might be interested in knowing more about, I can do that as well. So, thank you for watching, and I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties. I hope that we can get the glitches fixed and have another opportunity to answer questions and just hear what you have to say or what you think, and have a great time together.